It's been a while. Welcome back to my mad, stupidly ambitious attempt to try and analyse basically the entirety of Spirited Away. This is episode 3. I've already released 2 videos that you can go back and watch if you want, linked in the description. It's all being done in chronological order, so we're currently about 45 minutes into the film where we're starting this video. But as a quick recap of where we left off last time, Sem was at her lowest point in the film really, where she felt totally confused by the way everybody seems nice at points and cruel at others, and Haku, who had been kind, suddenly telling her to address him as Master Haku and telling the other workers they could roast Sen alive if she doesn't work hard. It all led to her feeling deeply alone and like she can't trust anyone, and I talked about this colour shift in the film with the cold blues battling the bright pinks, and I explained out of this lowest, coldest, bluest point, Haku's kind actions here bring the colour and the sun and the warmth back to Sen's depleted, childlike heart essentially. And I basically summarised what the sequence we're about to see play out now is. Haku showing kindness, it restoring Sen's trust in him and strengthening the feel that she isn't alone here. That's as good as you're getting for a recap. We're now going to go through that sequence a little more in depth in the garden by the pig pens, and then the sequence after it with the Stink/River Spirit saga. So let's begin. The first, perhaps obvious point to say is that setting this scene in the early morning is symbolically the perfect time to set it. One, because obviously that means there is a rising sun and the metaphorical sense of hope that brings following a very cold night, but also because everybody else is still asleep at this point, which means we get to see Sen running back through the bathhouse when it's totally empty and quiet and at peace. You see, one of Sen's struggles with the bathhouse that I mentioned last video was that there is no space or peace in it, no space for your feelings. All the workers are kept so busy and crammed into such packed spaces that there is no room for your emotions. Sen's crying last time was met with a worker beside her waking up and telling Sen to quiet down, so the early morning now gives us a sense of rising dawn, it gives us a sense of peace. Geographically, our understanding of the bathhouse is strengthened again by seeing Sen travel through it, and the fact it is so empty I think is symbolically conveying that she does have space now. She has got a chance to sit with her emotions now, as we're about to see is kind of exactly what she does here. And the point I will naturally have to repeat at various points throughout this film is one about kindness, essentially. The bathhouse is a cruel place in many ways, especially to a naive, innocent girl who's not used to the scary, slightly cynical adult world of working life. It's so easy for the harshness of life to break our spirits in a small way and turn us a bit cold and numb, the way so many of the characters do appear in this film at points, but equally, small acts of kindness and warmth within a world that can otherwise appear cold, you cannot underestimate their power. I think the few times we show kindness to someone and they just outright exploit it, we let those occurrences convince us that kindness is always exploited and that we shouldn't bother. However, there are times, such as here, where Sen showed kindness to the soot spirits in helping that one that was crushed by the coal, and now they return the kindness, having carefully looked after her shoes until such a time she needs them. It's a very, very small act, but even the smallest of acts can be powerful, and there's something slightly intimate and caring about looking after a person's clothes somehow, and it's nice to see how pleased the soot spirits look to have been able to help her as well. So she waves them goodbye, she climbs the staircase without any fear now in comparison to last night, which is just a nice subtle way to show her confidence is growing. She's okay with this big scary staircase now, and we also get a shot where she looks out across to the pig pens where her parents are. Obviously she's looking there because that's where she's about to go, and it's a useful establishing shot, but geographically, I think it's interesting to note actually that the pig pens and the town and all that other stuff are split away from the bathhouse by a giant chasm of very steep ravine that only the bridge provides a crossing between. I hadn't noticed just how divided these two locations really are until now, and I think that's a useful visual way to tell us how far away Sen is both from her living real life but also from her parents right now. And then I guess there's the social sense too. I mean, it suggests this bathhouse is this kind of fortress of Yubaba's wealth, and it's at a great distance from the rest of society. That same sort of economic divide shown in the geography. It's just an interesting tangent, but yeah, coming to the bridge again, warm pinks are very much starting to dominate now, and we see No Face. Not our first sight of No Face in the film, but this is the first time he's given proper focus, and the first time Sen properly notices him. He's standing exactly halfway across the bridge, which, if you remember, is exactly where we saw him the first time. Halfway across the bridge between the town and the bathhouse. The bridge that represented the last and most important of Sen's transitions into the spirit world. That's no coincidence. So what does this tell us exactly? I think it could say a lot of things, some of which I may come to more when we really get to know Face's character later in the film, but for now I'll just give one idea, which I think is to say No Face is a character that has a lot to do with identity. People often talk about him as a representation for greed, which I disagree with. He does show greed in this film, but he doesn't symbolise it. Look, his name is No Face, or Faceless, depending on how you translate it, I think, which in a film where there's a lot of people's names being taken away, or people fading as points about identity, I think it suggests to us this is a character feeling lost to his identity. There's certainly something in him to do with that, and Chihiro's journey across this film in a lot of ways is to kind of transition her own sense of self out of the child dependent on her parents, and losing that as we all do grow up, and then having to figure out, so who actually am I now? What's my place in the world? Partly through the medium of a spirit world and this spiritual journey, we see her kind of making that transition of identity. No Face, however, appears stuck in the middle of that transition. Stuck in the middle of the bridge. He's moved forwards enough to lose some touch with what identity he might have had before, but not really progressed far enough to discover anything new yet. Debate that if you like. I may come back to it when we get to No Face properly later on, I don't know. But I think Sen's body language is animated beautifully in this moment. No Face presents a level of threat to her as far as she sees it, as I suppose she's seen everything so far. It's new and unknown and scary, and humanity has always been terrified of the unknown. Is No Face going to be like a troll guarding the bridge who doesn't let her pass? She steels herself with an intake of breath, and then dares to face this scary demon with a lot more courage than she has shown. So again, there's progression there, and she walks forwards very slowly and stiffly. She lowers her head as she passes, and then speeds up with a nervous run afterwards. I just think the body language there is wonderfully done. And, of course, No Face is not a troll guarding the bridge type character. He does nothing to Sen but just watch her, because he's actually quite a helpless character, I think we discover later in the film. And Sen looks back once she passes. She can't see him anymore, but she doesn't think much of it because Haku's here now, and he leads Sen through a load of bright flowers.
You must never come here without me. Understand?
I understand.
Haku's quite stern here with her in a lot of ways, and Sen's response, I understand, rather than just a simple okay or yes, I think shows us she feels her response has to be slightly more formal, as though, you know, she sounds like she's one step away from addressing him as Master Haku here. He's not cruel or unkind, just quite stern about the seriousness of not coming here alone, which we'll get to in a second. We see her parents. She checks with Haku she's allowed to approach before bursting forwards and emotionally calling out to them. They offer no response because they're pigs, and they can't understand, as Haku explains.
Are they sick?
No. They ate too much. They're sleeping it off.
Again, the way he words this, it's not cruel or unkind at all. It's all just a bit emotionless, a bit distant. You don't hear much sympathy in his voice. He instructs Sen to look hard in order that she remembers what her parents look like in pig form, and Sen has this bigger emotional outburst with tears, and it's Haku that interests me here. He keeps a cold, glazed expression fixed on the pigs. He shows no reaction whatsoever to Sen's emotion. He's unfazed by that, which I have commented a bit on about Haku in the past, but I think it's worth addressing it directly now. He He's what would happen to Sen if she had not been shown kindness at her lowest point and had not been given the space to express her feelings, which she is being given here and in a minute. She would go very, very numb if she had to keep suppressing her emotion the way she was during the night, which tells us Haku wants to help her partly because he doesn't want to see someone else turn out like him, probably, but I also think partly because her warmth, if he can help her to maintain it, that warmth might be able to break him down again too and might spread to him. They need each other in that sense. His steeliness helps her to find her own resilience, and her openness helps him to find his heart. I think I did mention that in the first video, but it's particularly poignant here now because we get to see Haku slightly emotionless and his awkwardness in his body language now. You know, Sen is curled up in a ball, yet he is standing in this shot. The two are physically on different levels and it looks a bit off, and it's as though he doesn't quite have the openness to properly reach her yet. There's a slight disconnection here. What I'm trying to say is, technically, all the help and kindness he shows her is practical rather than emotional support, really. Like, he helped her to cross the bridge, he helped her get to Lynn, he helped her see her parents, he's instructed her to take note of their appearance, he now gives her her clothes back with more stern instructions.
Hide them.
And he then feeds her food. These are all practical measures, you know, and sometimes you get this sort of thing with people in families. It's more traditionally men who tend to do it, but obviously not exclusively, where they want to support someone who needs support for whatever reason, but they don't quite feel open enough to have the heart-to-hearts, or I guess brave enough to take on those emotions head on. So they instead show their kindness and their care through the more practical things around the emotional struggle, organising everything and forms and sorting out stuff and fixing repairs on cars and all that sort of stuff. It's not a criticism, I mean, in many ways it's a division of labour, but there is that skirting the room type feel to it. Haku is a bit like that because he's been numbed to his own feelings. However, in seeing her sadness here, we kind of see some of his empathy and his own emotion being rekindled, because after offering the clothes, we see a very, very faint smile on his face for, I think, possibly the first time this film. Just a little flicker of feeling, and then he is now able to crouch down onto her level and to reach her in a physical sense. He's looking at her attentively, and you just get the sense he wants to wrap his arm around her, but he's still not quite able to bring himself to do it yet. And this is where I'm going to say, cue the music. Name of Life, a fantastic, wonderful song that copyright almost certainly won't let me get away with playing, which is such a shame. I might try regardless, I don't know. Cue that, and cue one of the sweetest scenes I've ever seen in cinema. First, Sen reads the card and remembers her real name is Chihiro. Haku instructs her to keep the card safe and that it's in Yubaba taking people's names away that she's able to control them, which then comes with Haku, for the first time, opening up a tiny bit about himself with the line,
"If you completely forget it, you'll never find your way home. I've tried everything to remember mine."
There's a bit more warmth to his eyes now as well, and you can actually see some of the boyishness and the fact he is a kid in his animation here, just very naturally, through the experience of being around the open innocence of Sen, he's able to gradually free up more of his own again. It's nice how subtly and naturally you can see that happening just in the way he interacts with her here, moving from this stern kind of instruction level to this sitting together openness. He offers Sen food because she hasn't eaten much, but she's not hungry.
No.
I put a spell on it, so it'll give you back your strength. Just eat it.
This is why I said in the last video that you can't just think of food in this film as a motif about greed or gluttony like a lot of people talk about it as, because it's not. Like in real life, food can be a thing of pleasure and excess and all of that, but it can also be a thing of nourishment and nurturing. And Sen doesn't have an appetite at the moment. I guess that's symbolic of kind of isolating yourself and not feeling able to take in any form of nourishment, and the kind of, I guess, not being able to trust there is any nourishment. And I don't know if there is actually a spell on the food or not, or if he's just saying it, but it doesn't matter. What matters is what happens when she does eat. She starts to cry. And the way it slowly happens is what makes it so touching, I think. The tears start to well up, and then she just lets it free in full force in a way she hasn't done at all before in this film. The whole problem last night with the bathhouse and everything was that she couldn't open up and she couldn't express anything. It wouldn't be heard. She was nameless and friendless and alone. Her feelings got suppressed and she felt terribly, terribly sad, but she wasn't able to cry. Crying in this context is a huge positive, because all the numbness she was threatened with falling into is washed away again now. Worse than feeling sad, worse than anger even, I think, is that sort of numb bitterness that many people can find themselves trapped into, and part of what's so bad about it is how hard it is to break free from that again. And you know what I think's the best thing about this scene? The most powerful and memorable and meaningful thing in it for me is the music, because for a scene where the protagonist breaks down and cries, it's not the typical sort of soundtrack a movie would tend to use. Normally you would get some end of the world catastrophic sadness playing, some great tragedy that's massively sad and sympathetic, but that's not here. Name of Life is a wonderful song precisely because it's a bit more ambivalent than that. I mean, it sounds sad, but it also sounds wonderfully hopeful and tender at the same time. It feels sad, but sort of comforting and safe rather than catastrophic, and that's exactly right for here in the film, because it is safe for Sen to feel sad right now. It is okay for her to be sad. It's not the end of the world, it's not a catastrophic disaster, which is something we often forget ourselves in those ugly moments of our own sadness, that we can manage it, we can let it out, and we can come again to something more afterwards. That's the whole point of this scene, in my eyes. That when Sen breaks down, life doesn't crumble apart. The soft piano just plays, and Haku now does find the openness to be able to hold her and to just let her be sad, not to anxiously try cheering her up or removing the feeling or being scared by it and it becoming a great tragedy, but letting her sit with it, because it's in realising that suddenly it is a lot less overwhelming feeling sad, and we don't have to be afraid of it. So they sit there with the feeling, and she cries until she's ready to rise again. It sums up everything I've said both in the past two videos about kindness and love and emotion and colour in this film, that warmth and feeling can win out over coldness and numbness. And we then see them making their goodbyes.
Thank you, Haku. You're a good friend.
Which is also an important line to confirm to us now that she does in fact trust him again. She runs off with the perfect body language of like when you see a toddler running away from their parents in the playgrounds to see their friends. It's that sort of innocent, unbridled joy style run, which is fantastic. As she looks back across the bridge, she sees Haku is now a dragon flying in the sky and says,
"He's a dragon?"
Which makes me laugh, because imagine this in any other film. It would feel so random and out of place for the protagonist to say goodbye to someone, turn around, see they've transformed into a dragon and just go, "Oh, he's a dragon." It makes me laugh because it should feel so random, and yet somehow Miyazaki's managed to craft a film where something like that doesn't feel out of place, and you just accept it as a perfectly ordinary plot point. Yep, of course Haku's a dragon. Just before we get to the next sequence, I'll say two final things to wrap up this bit of the video where Sen's hope is restored and her heart is given space to rekindle its warmth. One is that as she runs off, we see No Face appear out of thin air again, which I think tells us that earlier when Sen turned at the end of the bridge and looked back to not be able to see him anymore, it tells us he hadn't gone away somewhere else so much as probably just gone invisible, and that he's now only just become visible again. I think that's interesting. Sen has to come back to this side of the bridge before he can be seen again. I'm not quite sure what that tells us. I suspect it's something I'll suddenly realise in a few weeks, but I'm highlighting it in case any of you have any thoughts. Equally, we see him stepping off the bridge himself now, finally able to cross, which is a fitting time for it to happen. You know, after Sen's emotional release, No Face is finally able to continue his own journey. I think we know on one level he is following Sen, and so it's probably partly just that, but something of the experience he's just had helps him find his own courage or ability or whatever it is to finish that transition across this bridge. He manages it now. And then this sequence ends with Kamaji waking up to find Sen collapsed, completely knackered, asleep on the floor, and he covers her with a cushion like a blanket. For one, it's sweet. For two, she's finally been able to rest where she was previously awake shivering all night. It's the perfect end to the sequence. Sen now finally feels safe enough to be able to sleep like a baby. What we then get is another changing sequence, where the sunlight is clouded in place of heavy rain. Evening descends, Yubaba returns, and the bathhouse readies itself for another busy night of work, and symbolically it's not entirely the same sequence, but very similar to the one we had before, which naturally would bring us back to a lot of the feelings we had before, the loneliness, the emptiness, the harsh realities of life. And we get Sen being half ignored by Lin again, not in an unkind way, but just too busy to focus on Sen with the lines,
"Where were you, Sen? I was really worried."
I'm sorry.
You know, she doesn't ask Sen to explain, Sen's not expected to explain, they then don't have a conversation about it any further, they just get on with their work, and we get these busy, cramped shots of very sleepy looking workers on the way to start shifts. What I'm saying is, we're quickly shown enough to suggest everything that had numbed Sen's heart so badly last night. All of that is still here. It's all the same. Nothing of the hope and warmth we saw in the morning with Haku has physically changed the place or anything. The difference is just how that fleeting experience of warmth gives her the strength needed to navigate the difficult world, to not be numbed by it. But yeah, they head off to work, Sen's first shift in the bathhouse, and we get very traditional sounding Japanese music play. I don't know what you'd call it, someone comment, but you know, the drums, the flutes, where so much of the soundtrack in this film centres around the piano. It's an interesting change, this track. Just the sound of it fits the expression you see on their faces here. Grit. Just knuckle down and power through. Determination, I suppose. Not in a big, fiery, psyched up sort of way, but a nice, steady, continuous drum that you can work to and roll up your sleeves to. And that's Sen's approach right now, despite how very bad she is at the work. She's very slow and she's very clumsy, but you cannot fault the determined look on her face.
Jeez, Sen. Haven't you ever worked a day in your life?
No, of course she hasn't. She's 10. And the fact it's a social norm in this spirit world here that 10-year-olds would be experienced workers, I think tells us something quite damning about this community, and I suppose it makes it entirely unsurprising they are all a bit cynical and bitter. Okay, yeah, as a school counsellor I could now make a tangent off into a criticism about education systems that don't offer space to let kids be kids, but instead apply a very serious and increasing pressure to work and to force grades mentality upon kids' shoulders at too early an age. Okay, that's not the point of the film, obviously it's not, it's nothing to do with that, but it is a fitting point to make because I think there's a balancing act that Miyazaki understands about children, where there is that quote I think I referenced in the first video where Miyazaki sees his granddaughter and wants to call her a lazy bum, yet also knows and understands it's perfectly fine for her to be lazy at that age because she has rich inner resources that will come to the fore later on if given space. There's a balancing act between the two of letting kids be kids and lazy bums so that they can spend time navigating their internal worlds, and also helping kids develop a bit of grit and determination. you do kind of need both. I don't know if the split's 50-50 on that, but Sen has been allowed to be a mopey, whiny, lazy bum all her life until the start of this film. And that's perfectly fine. It's good in many ways. She also needs the warmth and care of Haku and nurturing that food symbolically seemed to represent, and at the same time she is now learning how to work a job and develop that bit of grit. I think 10 years old is probably too young an age to expect grit from someone, but the bathhouse isn't a fair world, and it's a testament to both Sen's and to Haku's support that she does cope. Anyway, enough of that tangent. Sen and Lin are given the big tub to work on today, which we can assume is Yubaba deliberately giving Sen the most difficult job to try and break her spirit. Lin remarks that the big tub is frog work, which is an interesting comment that I think brings us back to what all the frogs in this film might be about. I suggested some possible idea in the first video, but now I'm wondering if these frogs show us a slow, physical transformation that the workers here undergo. Because there's a lot of workers that do look very human. Then there's a lot you see that are human but with very froggish features. And then there's the ones that are actual frogs. And if the most difficult jobs are meant to be frog work, that makes you think the frogs are more experienced workers, the ones who have been around the longest. Is that what happens to people here? Does spending too many years stuck working in the bathhouse turn them into frogs and they lose more and more of their humanity? I don't know, it's an interesting thought though. Anyway, Sen tips her water out into the garden. We know exactly where this garden is in relation to the bathhouse now, because we saw Sen here earlier with Haku when she just crossed the bridge. When all those frantic feet were running across, exactly where Sen is now standing herself. Returning to old locations in a new light, which is useful not only because the geography becomes so easy to map out in our minds, but it's also nice to compare where Sen is at this point in her journey to where she was last time we saw the garden. She was an outsider then, now she's on the inside, where No Face is on the outside now. The one undergoing a very similar journey to what Sen was at that point in the film. She bows to him.
Hello? Aren't you getting wet out there?
No Face doesn't answer and Lin calls Sen away, but she leaves the door open for him in case he does want to come inside. She has helped him with a very small act of kindness. Sen herself wasn't able to just enter this door at that point in her journey. She had to take the long route down to Kamaji, but she can use her position now to help someone else a bit further down. I guess the way Haku helped her. If we're thinking career-wise, that makes this like a leg up and literally opening the door for someone else, but more generally it's just Sen daring to trust a stranger that we know she was wary of. Choosing to trust and show compassion and kindness where most of the workers would either just not care enough or not have enough headspace to even really notice or think about No Face and what he might need. So in No Face comes. I love the way you see all the workers poking their heads out to watch Lin and Sen in this scene here and to tease them about getting the big tub. Touches like that just make the world feel more like a real community, and I think it tells us something about the joy they would all get from watching a stranger, a human, an outsider like Sen, fail and struggle at her job, rather than wanting to help her. For example, the way Sen just helped No Face. But they try their best to clean it. Lin points out that it will take months, but they've then got a customer on the way already.
This is clearly harassment,
Lin exclaims, and she's probably got a point. They all take pleasure in seeing Sen fail and would relish to see her spirit broken, but it's interesting how unfazed Sen is by this mountain of work. Lin gets annoyed and complains, Sen doesn't. However, what's also interesting actually is that Lin doesn't get angry with Sen about it. She's angry at the foreman, she's angry at whoever assigns the jobs and the customers, but she's not angry at Sen. Even though the whole reason Lin is getting lumbered with such difficult work is because she's with Sen and they're trying to make things difficult for Sen. It's not Sen's fault, but you can see why someone in Lin's position might unfairly blame Sen or be annoyed with her. But she doesn't blame Sen, and that's a credit to her. So Sen has to get the herbal soap token from the foreman, and we see her again slip and stumble as she leaves the tub. For one, I very much enjoy how clumsy Sen is throughout this section of the film. I think it reaffirms the sense that she isn't used to work, she isn't skilled at what she's doing. Everything's new and a bit of a struggle, but it's a nice flaw in the world of cinema as well, where protagonists do often overcome the difficulties with incredible ease. It's nice to see someone slipping about and making an idiot of themselves a bit. To give credit to Sen as well, and her rich inner resilience, we do see her slipping and stumbling several times, with the workers who are watching on laughing whenever she does slip, and I know if I was in her position right now, that would make me feel painfully self-conscious, having them laugh at you, and I'd probably lose heart with what I was doing. Sen gets laughed at a lot here, but she just seems to shrug it off and carry on. Sure, she's not a capable worker who scrubs floors effectively the way she might have done if she was pressed to work hard from a young age, but learning how to scrub a floor is an easy thing to learn later in life. You know, what she has developed is an inner strength and security to shrug people off laughing at her. What I should say about this section of the film now as well is that it's all a bit like a big test, a big trial for Sen. She's arguably had quite a few trials already. How to cope when your parents are gone, how to navigate a scary set of stairs, how to be persistent with Kamaji and then Yubaba. In every film, the protagonist undergoes some sense of a trial to test them and to make sure they're ready for the eventual final showdown later on. Maybe not every film actually, but normally these trials are like fights, defeating the gatekeeper type stuff, rescuing something, finding hidden treasure. The trial here is to clean a tub, or to serve a customer, basically. That's it. No fancy fight or adventure stuff, just to serve her first customer in her new job. How refreshingly real is that as a trial? How relatable. It's wonderful. And through Miyazaki's wonderful imagination, he's taken a very real trial and yet also elevated it with fantasy to a level that it's not boring in the way Sen has to finish a spreadsheet or something would be boring. And there's also something else to say about Sen's trial here, which becomes apparent as we run through the next moments of the film. Because we then cut away to Yubaba, who is, again, obsessing over her riches, but she hears or senses something bad is on its way, which signals her to hastily pack her jewels away, which is a nice touch. You know, something bad is coming, quick, hide the jewels. But she looks out of the window and remarks,
"What useless scum is leaking around in the rain?"
All of this signals incoming danger, and the point I want to make is there's something about the film here which takes on aspects of horror and gothic genres. The dark, heavy rain, the sense of a looming threat, this slow zoom which tells us beware, you know. We see all the shops shutting their doors to keep this looming threat out, and we see them turn their lights off to pretend they're not in. And then we see the silhouette out of the fog. This is very gothic, very horror stuff, an evil monster incoming. It looks like muck, it's the stink spirit, and I think we can guess at this point that this will be the customer Sen has to serve, and then it cuts back to Sen again to kind of visually suggest that this will be the customer, and then it cuts back and forth between Sen and the stink spirit a couple of times until eventually the two meet, which, you know, in the editing creates a level of tension as this scary gothic monster approaches the small, innocent character who is totally unprepared for the threat, sort of thing. By drawing on gothic conventions a bit, Miyazaki is able to elevate this very ordinary trial of serve your first ever customer in a new job to a level of tension and fear. But yeah, Sen's trying to get the herbal soap token anyway, but the foreman won't help her because he doesn't like humans, I guess. He gives tokens to everyone else, but not to her. Kindness spreads kindness, however. Sen helped No Face earlier, and he repays the favour by giving her the soap token whilst the foreman's attention is distracted by Yubaba calling. The kindness here is a moment we'll later see No Face has misunderstood. Sen needed one token specifically to complete her task. No Face will misinterpret this to think tokens are something Sen desires and that he should give her more of, but we'll get to that in a second. Right now, Yubaba's telling the foreman,
We have an intruder.
Is it a human?
I'm not quite sure. Figure it out and report back.
It's not a big point, but watching this the first time, you'd take this intruder they're talking about to mean the stink spirit approaching. However, she's actually referring to No Face entering through the garden door as the intruder. It's a nice way to subtly set up the idea that they would see No Face as an intruder and an outsider like they first saw Sen, whilst also adding tension to the approach of the stink spirit from the fact we are wrongly led to believe that's who she's talking about. Also, her phone is a skull. Just that, her phone is a skull. Then we're back to Sen and Lin, and the sense of community this place has is strengthened again in our minds by the fact we realise these tokens are the ones we earlier saw getting sent down to Kamaji, who then works all his machinery to send them the water they need. Everything ties together. And I love the wonderful detail of body language here. Lin tells Sen to watch the water and yank the rope again when the tub's full, while she goes off to get food, but she adds,
You can let go of the rope now.
and we see Sen look at the rope again carefully, slowly let it go, still staring at it, and then, when nothing bad happens, smiles in satisfaction. That's exactly the sort of very expressive, transparent body language you do get with kids, and it adds a lot of character and emotion to something simple as letting go of a rope. Also interesting to note, she doesn't slip over this time. She's found her balance. No Face is in the corner of the room now though, like some sleep paralysis demon. And we get this leitmotif that often plays to signal his appearance in the film. He's offering Sen more bath tokens because he misunderstood, thinking she desires them, and I suppose it's worth questioning exactly what No Face's motivation is right now. Is he trying to be kind again in the hope she'll return the favour and also help him in some way once more? Is he just being kind because she was nice to him and he's eager to really show his gratitude? Would he eat her if he accepted the way he later eats the frog, and that this kindness is just a materialistic trick to try and possess her, let's say? I think it's kind of that. I do think he would eat her, but I don't think it's exactly a trick. Nor do I think his motivation is greed or anything. I should probably talk about No Face now. What do we know about No Face, let's say? He has no face, no voice, no real name. He fades in and out, no identity. He's a bit lost and lacking a sense of self. But what do we tend to do when we lack a sense of self? We search for a thing to really hold tight and cling to, things to symbolically ingest, to take in so that our internal world doesn't feel as hollow and empty. Something external we can possess to give us some sense of voice, hence later eating the frog and then having its voice inside him. In a way, that's a desperation to possess something. I don't mean possess in the dark sense of the word, but desperately trying to please and win Sen's affection through gifts, offering her anything she wants in the hope he can kind of take her heart and find some semblance of identity through her, through this person he probably does idealise to an extent. Not romantically or anything, I'd very much doubt that. But he has kind of fallen for her in a way. He's a little obsessed with Sen.
Where is Sen? I want Sen!
You hear in the grunts he makes how desperate he is for Sen to take the tokens. But she doesn't need them. Accepting them probably would be a sign of greed from Sen, but that's not her, and she kindly refuses, and he looks kind of put down and disappointed about this, and he fades away as though he's been rejected. So we cut back to Yubaba now, who's come down from her office because this stink spirit is some serious stuff. This bit in the film just makes me laugh when you think of it like a sort of parody, because this is like the bit in lots of action or thriller or gothic films even, where this dangerous creature's like approaching, or something's heading towards the spaceship or the castle or whatever it is. Rather than a dangerous monster, however, here it's just a bad smell. It's like they're under threat from a ball of sewage, and yeah, that is repeating the same point throughout this film of characters who seem evil actually turning out not to be, but it's also funny to keep parody in mind with some of the lines they say.
The stink spirit.
And apparently it's an extra smelly one.
He's headed straight for the bridge.
That line, that's something straight out of an action thriller or whatever, like a guard or a soldier pointing to the enemy and shouting, he's heading straight for the bridge. I love it. They're trying to ward it off like it's a mine that will crash into them and explode or something, and they're failing. And Yubaba twigs it might not actually be a stink spirit and decides then that they have to let him in.
Just give him a bath and get him out of here as fast as you can.
So you've got like red alert now. Everyone to the battle stations. All the workers are meant to evacuate the baths and head for safety of their rooms because there's a bad smell coming. All of them except for Sen. Of course they're going to lump Sen with this job. We've seen that was coming, and then we hear another worker shout,
Ah! It's here!
And we see the sludge seeping in from under the door. I don't know if this is the English dub that's poking fun at these kind of action tropes, or if it's the same in Japanese. But either way, someone is poking fun and parodying here, and it's great. And this is the test here now, and I'm going to call this one an initiation test into the bathhouse in a way, sort of. Because Sen is someone who's yet to have served any customers before, and she's just been given the most difficult job possible. If she can do that, a job none of the other workers would dare want to do, she's proved quite clearly that not all humans are lazy, useless crybabies like the spirits seem to think. She will have proved she is someone who will get stuck in with them, and therefore this will be an important moment in helping her to belong and to be accepted here. Plus, also Sen will take a lot of heart and confidence from her triumph. I don't think I need to run through this scene in too great detail anyway. We understand Yubaba just wants to get the stink spirit in and out and have his gold paid to them. Fair play she stands alongside Sen at the beginning, we have to give her credit for that, but we know she's not, at least initially, bothered about what's wrong with the stink spirit itself. You know, she's twigged it might not actually be a stink spirit. She's realised something is wrong.
Something's fishy. That doesn't seem like a stink spirit to me.
But still, her main concern is the gold, so just get him in and out as quickly as possible. And what's wrong is that this isn't actually a stink spirit. It's a river spirit that's been polluted, as we'll see in a moment. It's come to the bathhouse hoping to wash the pollution away, and you see its disappointment when it climbs into the bath and discovers nothing has changed, which I think is also a useful reminder about what the bathhouse is exactly meant to be, a place of spiritual cleansing.
It's a bathhouse for the spirits. It's where they come to replenish themselves.
Which perhaps may also be why No Face travelled to the bathhouse to begin with. And that is a point I'd have to have knowledge about Japanese culture and Shinto to really provide any insight on, and I don't think I have enough to comfortably suggest anything, so I leave that space open for anyone in the comments here. However, I will say it strikes me as typical that a place meant for spiritual cleansing turns out instead to be a typical capitalist setup with a gold-obsessed owner and deprived workers who, in themselves, probably do not feel at all spiritually cleansed or healthy. Not much about the bathhouse transpires to be cleansing, not half as much as Zeniba's cottage, and the stink spirit would not have found any cleansing here himself if it weren't for Sen's close attention and care. Look, we've seen kindness and compassion and respect and persistence and all this other stuff from Sen in small bits already. What we see here, I guess, is a culmination of it all, but also what I'm going to call understanding, or her attempt, her willingness to try and understand something that's beyond her comprehension. This is one of my favourite tropes in stories. A scary or dangerous or ugly beast roars, and where normally people would be scared away, or in this case cover their noses and recoil at the terrible smell, someone understands the feeling and the message beneath the roar and seeks to respond to it. The stink spirit roars out this sludgy breath, and Sen, rather than recoiling, tries to think about what the stink spirit might be communicating. Correctly guesses it's asking for soap tokens to be used, which involves hard physical work of wading through the sludge, but also symbolically this is wading through another person's muck, you know, this is the spirit's stink. She even falls headfirst into it, and this spirit helps her up and holds her where, again, rather than recoiling, she's trying to understand what the spirit might be communicating. Why is he holding me up here? What does he want? She sticks her hand in and feels the handlebars of a bike. Ah, that's what's wrong. And I love that. Sometimes we can't just understand. Sometimes we jump too readily to our own conclusions, or don't bother and recoil, where often we need to show a bit of time and attentiveness to think beyond our comprehension and to search for a deeper answer than we can just see. And we see the contrast quite clearly when Lin comes in and calls,
You're gonna be fine! I won't let him hurt you!
You know, that's what they're all thinking might be going on, that the stink spirit is going to hurt Sen. Sen has shown the attentiveness to understand better, however.
It feels like there's a thorn in his side!
And so calling this, Yubaba springs into action, and again we've got to credit her here. It's, I think, important we see her showing some genuine leadership qualities in this film. She pulls everyone together in an effort to pull this thorn from its side, and suddenly we have what wasn't there before. Everybody working together, everybody cooperating rather than the more general, well, I'll just get on with my own job, never mind anything else sort of mentality. They all come together, and it reaffirms just how powerful a connection and just how big a difference it can make to the feel of an environment and to the individuals within it. Suddenly, this cold, cynical bathhouse actually does seem like a place of genuine spiritual cleansing, and they heave, and out comes all the rubbish and pollution of the river.
Well done.
It all feels quite a spiritual moment here. I think it's hard to pin down why exactly. I'd like to know people's thoughts about the river spirit and its face here, because these are the things I don't know about. Obviously this is a point about nature and pollution, but I don't think I need to stress that. The sudden silence and minimalism in the visuals gives it the feel of a spiritual revival and the completion of an initiation quest, which I suppose is supported by the river spirit's words, "Well done," rather than "thank you for helping me" or whatever, you know. Well done suggests she's achieved something for herself too, her own spiritual cleansing maybe as much as his. And like the completion of most initiation quests, she is left with a Holy Grail style relic, this gift from the river spirit, which will later prove important in the story. But if I was to pin her achievement and this spiritual transformation down to something a bit more concrete, I'd say she has kind of transformed the bathhouse right now. The workers start to become a bit less cynical and purposeless now, a bit more connected and caring of each other. We've seen her natural goodness draw out glimpses of Kamaji's, Lin's and Haku's own more stifled goodness, but I think this marks that change for the characters of this film as a whole. Not to say they're not still all obsessed with gold, and that the reason for Yubaba hugging Sen is,
We made so much money!
okay, so yeah, it's not a total transformation, and we'll still see a lot of unhealthy aspects in the second iteration of this same trial, which is the kind of spiritual cleansing of No Face. We'll see a lot of negative sides to the bathhouse again still, but this does feel like a start now. The community begins to sort of pull together, Sen begins to find her belonging, things start to change. We are now an hour and 6 minutes into the film, and I think this is a good place to stop for today. We've seen Sen's growth from that great low point in the previous night, her own revival, I guess you can say, in the garden with Haku, and now her triumph. Greater challenges do lay ahead, but the importance of this triumph cannot be underestimated. hopefully you enjoyed this video. Again, there's a lot of space open for you to add your own thoughts. I never claim to be giving the definitive analysis, just to share my own slightly babbling, passionate interpretations of everything. So let me know what you think. Like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you want to stick around for the next one, support me on Patreon if you fancy even more, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And a special thank you goes to Devin, David Kling, Darren Bragaglia, Kestrel, Gay Hitler, Incomplete Sentience, Samara Salsi, Sharakov2814 and Joshua C. Follier. Thank you.